that music means it's time for some weird questions with Jimmy Akin. Jimmy Akin, our guest for both hours today. And one of the fun things we get to do with Jimmy from time to time is the Weird Questions segment. Jimmy, of course, is the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World and is well known to accept whatever the question is on its merits and apply reason and revelation to the question and come up with the best answer he can. And so because of that willingness, I think more and more people have approached Jimmy with weirder and weirder questions. Well, I don't know if they're weirder and weirder, but there's more and more of them. So we have a couple hours devoted to that. Jimmy Akin, of course, in addition to being the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, also has the podcast, the Jimmy Akin Podcast, and is the longest, I believe, the longest serving member of the Catholic Answers family here, and an apologist, author. Jimmy, is that correct? Longest serving member?
Oh, yeah.
Longer than Jen?
Oh, yeah. I'm not only the senior apologist at Catholic Answers, I'm the senior employee.
Yeah, right. Which, by the way, that's no mean feat because people stay once they come here to Catholic Answers. So I don't know what that is, but more than 30 years, I think.
Oh, yeah. More than 31 years at this point.
Yeah. All right, we got a bunch of weird questions for you, Jimmy. So no need to call today because all the questions are in. We tend to get, actually, the weird question shows tend to be better when we collect them from the internet because I think sometimes people are not quite sure how weird they can go unless we take the written questions. And the first one comes from a friend of ours here at the show, Patrick Sweeney, been a listener and a supporter for a long time. In addition to whatever else he does, he's a catechist in the state of New York. And Patrick Sweeney asked this. I heard this as an argument against the body and soul being distinct and advocating strict materialism. That is, it's all in the brain. If we consider that memories, emotions, reasoning, consciousness, personality, etc., are distinct from the body in the senses of sight, sound, smell, touch, taste, then what accounts for the changes that occur when drinking alcohol or taking drugs for a temporary effect, or the habitual use of psychedelic drugs, which cause a permanent effect? A spiritual soul should be unaffected by the chemical changes in the brain. But since behavior is changed passively from the ingestion in this and not by an active decision, doesn't that prove materialism and disprove a spiritual soul?
So this is a question that comes up periodically, and I've considered it myself for years. In fact, I actually raised this question explicitly in Lecture 1 whenever I teach parapsychology and need to deal with the nature of consciousness. And I point out that, people have been taking alcohol and drugs for a long time. I mean, all the way back through human history. In fact, into prehistory. Before the invention of write-in, people knew about the effects of various substances like this. What the substance is will change depending on where in the world you are. In some places it's alcohol, in other places it's magic mushrooms, in a lot of places in the Middle East it's khat, which is a plant that we don't have here in North America. But it's been known all the way throughout human history. In fact, the Egyptians had a 10-day work week, and they'd give one guy, they had every 10th day off, and they'd give one guy the day off on the 9th day so he could go brew beer so that they could have alcohol on the 10th day. I assume there was a lag time because if you have one day brewed beer, it's not going to be very good. So I assume he would prepare beer for a month or something in the future.
Oh yeah.
But they've been doing it, as have people all over the world for forever. And so I point out in Lecture 1, whenever I teach Introduction to Parapsychology, that if you took this question to St. Thomas Aquinas and said, how do you, guess what? People's consciousness gets affected when they drink and take drugs. Aquinas would have said, yeah, no, duh. This is not this is not news. This is something that dualists, or people who believe that consciousness is not simply produced by the brain, this is something dualists have been aware of all the way down through history. It's not like they haven't thought about it. It's not like they don't have answers to it. And so what's Aquinas' answer? Well, he, like many others, proposed that that human consciousness, or the mind, is tightly integrated with the body. And so if you introduce changes in the body, then that's going to introduce changes in the mind. So it's not that the two substances have nothing to do with each other. One way, that's a fairly recent way of articulating a possible model to explain this, is the transducer model. So on a reductionist view, all consciousness reduces to the functioning of the brain, and so you could say the brain generates consciousness. It's a generator. But maybe it's not a generator. Maybe it's a transducer. So what's a transducer? Well, a transducer is something that converts one thing into another. That's what the transduction is. It's the conversion of one thing into another. So, for example, if you're listening to this show on the radio, well, our voices are going into microphones, which transduce the sound waves of our voices into electronic signals that are then processed and sent through the different media to get them to your receiving device. Let's say it's a radio, and then your radio transduces those electrical signals back into sound waves so you can hear our voices. If you're watching us online, in addition to the transduction of our voices, we also have cameras that are transducing our images into electrical signals, and then your device transduces those electrical signals back into visual signals. So that's what a transducer is in general terms, and in both the cases of cameras and microphones and screens and speakers, they're mechanical transducers. But there are more than mechanical transducers. There also are biological transducers. And so our eyes transduce light into electrochemical signals to be processed in the brain. Our ears transduce sound waves into electrochemical signals to be processed in the brain. Our sense of touch transduces various forms of tactile information into electrochemical signals to be processed in the brain. So our skin is covered in transducers. And our senses of taste and smell also transduce chemical information into electrochemical signals to be processed in the brain. So all of our senses involve transducers. We have transducers built into us, and they cover every square inch of the surface of our skin. So we've got all this transduction happening in the human body, taking the signals up to the brain. So what if the brain is itself a transducer? What if its job is to relate the physical body to consciousness? And if that's the case, then you can answer the question about alcohol and drugs by looking at the behavior of other transducers. If you take a radio or a television and you start messing with it, changing the settings all around and maybe taking it partially apart and stuff like that, or jamming extra bits into it, it's going to affect its ability to do its job as a transducer. The sound may become really muddy, or the picture may become unclear or colorless and start rolling and things like that if it's an old style TV. So you can mess up the function of a transducer by messing with the transducer. And so if our brain is a transducer and you start messing with its function by introducing alcohol or drugs, then you're going to mess up how consciousness works. And so, it's not going to be a crystal clear perception or reception of consciousness in the brain because of how you've messed up the brain. So this is one way of articulating the issue. And so it's a possible model. You then need to say, okay, do we have any evidence for this model compared to reductionism? which would say it's all based in the brain. And well, yeah, we do have multiple lines of evidence pointing to consciousness being independent of the brain. To cite an easy, obvious example, people have near-death experiences where their brain shuts down within seconds of cardiac arrest, and yet they continue to have conscious experiences so they can report on them when their hearts are restarted. And as testimony to the reality of those experiences, they frequently come back with what's known as veridical information. That is information, let's say, about their environment that they had no knowledge of before their death, and yet they come back with this extra accurate information that goes beyond random chance. And that's only one line of evidence. There are multiple others, but I've been discussing this at some length, and I know we're coming up on the break, so I'll leave it there for now. But this is an old problem with old answers.
Patrick, thank you very much. You're an old friend, and we're glad to get the question from you. Thanks for starting us off with weird questions. Lots more weird questions to come for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Proclaiming the faith, changing lives.
The year was 1993. EWTN provides live coverage for World Youth Day 93 from Denver, Colorado to 32 million homes. It marks the debut of a new producer, Michael Warsaw, who will one day become EWTN's chairman of the board and chief executive officer.
To learn more about Mother Angelica's life and the history of EWTN, visit EWTN.com/Mother Angelica.
I love that music. Because I like that music, but also because we get to do Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin when we hear that music. And we've got 2 hours of, we probably could do 5 hours of Weird Questions with all the questions we've got, but we'll go through 2 hours of Weird Questions with Jimmy. And this one comes from Cindy M92. I have asked multiple priests and exorcists about, quote, perfect possession, and have yet to have anyone give me an answer. I have read about this characterization of complete possession of a person by Father Malachi Martin, as well as a few other exorcists, but no thorough definition or any current, thorough definition from any current exorcist or priest confirm that perfect possession is true and possible. Could you please expand on this? It seems in these crazy times, perfect possession would explain a lot of what we see in the church at large and in the world. For example, people openly and flagrantly in a state of mortal sin, able to go to Mass, receive the sacraments, come into contact with holy objects, receive communion, etc., without any adverse reaction or manifestations towards these holy things. I am hopeful and humbly asking that you will answer with clarity about perfect possession.
Okay, so happy to do that. The term perfect possession is used in the exorcistic community. It's also sometimes referred to as subjugation, as distinct from possession. And the differential element in perfect possession that distinguishes it from regular possession is the willingness of the subject. So if a person is willingly possessed, then the demon is able to achieve a greater degree of control than in an ordinary possession. And so it's referred to as perfect possession or subjugation. And So that's basically what perfect possession is. It is something that's reported. I don't think it explains a lot of what's going on in the world today, because possession itself is very rare, and perfect possession is even rarer because most people don't willingly get possessed. So they don't freely surrender their will to that of a demon, and so it's very, very rare that you encounter this. So I don't think it explains a lot of what's going on in the world. And I particularly don't think it explains people who are in mortal sin going to mass or receiving the sacraments or having contact with holy objects, and not having any reaction. The reason for that is that demons are notoriously averse to the holy. In fact, that's listed in the rite of exorcism as one of the diagnostic criteria. If the individual that's displaying an alternate personality is not able to say the name Jesus or look at a statue of the Virgin Mary or things like that, then it's displaying aversion to holiness. And that's one of the signs that can contribute, among other signs, to the existence of possession. And so demons do not like their host receiving communion or going to confession. They may allow it in some situations. They may not be able to stop it in other situations. But in general, they don't like holy objects. They don't like holy things. They don't like the sacraments, and they especially do not like the Holy Eucharist. And so if I see someone who I have reason to believe is in a state of sin, just being able to receive communion and not seeming to have any problem with it, I would say, okay, well, they're in a state of sin, and they don't have a sensitivity to the sacredness of what they're doing. Their conscience is dulled. And so that's why they're able to receive it as if it's nothing. But if they had a demon, then ordinarily and especially if they're perfectly possessed, then ordinarily they would be having a reaction to these holy things, and they would not be able to, in ordinary circumstances, be able to receive as if it were no problem.
Cindy, I hope that you were very clear. You wanted a clear answer, so I hope that gets at what you wanted. Thank you very much for the question. It's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin today on Catholic Answers Live. This one comes from Poena. I was asked if Adam is highly respected in our faith. I wasn't sure how to answer. We highly remember him because of the fall and original sin, but I never thought of him as someone highly respected. One person in the conversation who is Latter-day Saints and not Catholic said that's ridiculous. He is the father of all man and of course would be highly respected. I said he was in the lineage of Christ, and the LDS person again looked at me like I was nuts. How would you answer that question? Thanks, Jimmy.
Well, you're certainly right. He's in the lineage of Christ, as is every other human being in the, biblical presentation of matters. And specifically, Adam's listed in the lineage of Christ in Luke chapter 3. So I'm not sure why a Mormon would look at you like you were crazy for saying that, because, they've got the same passages in their Bibles too. So I suspect there may be more to the situation that would be clearer if I had been there to witness the interaction. But in terms of, is Adam highly respected? Well, so I think the answer is yes and no. I think in part it depends on who's doing the respecting. Not everybody thinks about this question. I would think it's fair to say that Adam is not respected because he plunged our race into sin, and you don't deserve respect for doing that. That kind of, even though he was a glorious, individual prior to the fall, he chucked it all away, not just for himself, but for all of us too. And so that kind of takes the shine off of the respect you deserve. So I think that it's legitimate to recognize Adam's fault And, I mean, that's kind of, other than being the ancestor of all humans in the biblical presentation, that's the thing he's famous for, is plunging us all into sin and making us all subject to death. And so neither one of those is a good thing. And we have to take that into account in our analysis of his character. On the other hand, he is the most senior human being. I mean, I may be the senior employee at Catholic Answers, but he's the senior human being. He's even senior to Eve, the way Genesis presents it. So, well, okay, you want to respect your elders. Well, he's as elder as it gets. So he should be respected for that. He also is respected, because he honor your father and mother. Well, he's the universal father. So he should be respected for that reason too. And there are Christians who do, respect him. In C.S. Lewis' Chronicles of Narnia, there, you have this series of stories about children from our world being transported to another world, which is populated, for example, by talking animals. And and actually this subject comes up, and one of the creatures from Narnia is talking to a human child and says, you're a descendant of the Lord Adam and the Lady Eve. That's high honor. And so that presupposes honor for the Lord Adam and for the Lady Eve. And, they're also creatures of God and should be respected for that reason. So I think it's a mix. There are things to respect about him, but there are also things that kind of pretty seriously take the shine off of that respect.
Paulina, thank you very much for the question. Lots of good, weird questions today for Jimmy Akin, senior apologist, as he said, here at Catholic Answers. Adam really does have seniority. That's pretty well established seniority there. I don't think anyone's going to overtake him. This one comes from Moose Keto, and I think keto is. I
like that name, Moose, because in fact moose are keto. They're very low in carb.
That's a good point. Yes, Moose Keto asked this. All right, an aliens question. If aliens made of antimatter showed up and wanted to become Catholic, how would we accomplish this when the sacraments, like baptism, ordination, and the Eucharist, involve contact with matter?
Okay, so if aliens made of antimatter show up, I hope they got a really good magnetic bottle, because otherwise this is not going to end well. But if they showed up and they wanted to become Catholic, they would need to be baptized, and so one would have to run this past the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith just to confirm it, that this is the way to do it. But it seems to me the obvious solution is to get anti-water and baptize them with anti-water, and similarly give them other sacraments that involve contact with matter, only give them an antimatter equivalent to it. So we already know how to make basic atoms of antimatter, and so water is really simple. You just need anti-hydrogen and anti-oxygen, and you can make anti-water. In fact, given the likelihood of organic chemistry as a basis for life, they probably have anti-water on their planet already. So it would even be natural anti-water. In fact, they likely would be carrying it with them to drink. And so I would say, well, okay, have one of the antimatter aliens take some anti-water and baptize another antimatter alien. And okay, then that antimatter alien would be an antimatter Catholic. Because all antimatter is normal matter with the charges flipped from positive to negative. And so in theory, it may not disturb the validity of the sacrament. But as I said, one would want to talk to the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith to try to confirm that.
All right, Moose. So what actually happens if you come into contact with the antimatter?
The particles of opposite charges annihilate and release a tremendous amount of energy. So
you're a bomb, basically.
Basically, this is the most efficient producer of energy that we're aware of. So you get a bigger bang for your buck, literally speaking, if you slam matter and antimatter into each other. If it happens on a microscopic scale, it's not that big of a deal. But if it happens with macroscopic objects, it would be amazingly devastating.
All right. But it's not like a mirror universe or something like that. It's just stuff that's in our universe that just has a different charge. It's not like Spock, antimatter Spock has a beard.
No.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's just the charges are flipped. But we actually don't have a lot of it in our universe, and that's a mystery of science. Today, we don't know why there is so little antimatter in the universe. You might expect, given that when certain particles decay, they produce equal amounts of matter and antimatter.
Yeah.
You would expect half the universe to be matter and half the universe to be antimatter. And in actuality, it's overwhelmingly matter, and scientists are not sure why. That's an ongoing mystery under investigation.
Call if you know where the antimatter is. All right, we'll be right back with more weird questions for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live. We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers monthly giving club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
From its earliest days, Catholic faith has been lived by a yearly cycle of feasts and seasons. The new book from Mike Aquilina and Adam Lucas, Feasts of Our Fathers, is a one-stop companion for praying and meditating through the holy days and seasons of the Church with help from the most ancient Christian people. Don't just read about the early saints, pray with them. Order your copy of Feasts of Our Fathers now at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Starting out December with a little bit of fun. Jimmy Akin, weird questions for Jimmy Akin. Jimmy Akin, of course, the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, and a well-known, willing taker of weird questions. So it's Friday. What dropped today on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World?
Well, today it was episode 341, which is a Patrons Questions episode. So every quarter we gather up questions that our patrons have asked and we answer them. So it's kind of a potpourri of different questions, many of them weird. Next Friday for episode 342, we have a look at exorcism coming up, and we're going to be going through both the 1614 and the 1998 rites of exorcism.
Oh, all right. The Exorcism episode. You can find it at mysterious.fm or wherever you get your podcast. You can also find it on YouTube, all of Jimmy's stuff, or a great deal of it available on YouTube, including the Jimmy Akin podcast, the newer little brother to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, where you tackle mysteries, but they're mysteries of the faith.
Right. So this last Monday, we had episode 12, which notice the difference between 12 and 341. But we had episode 12, which is on the question of, is everything predestined? Because there are a number of Christians, particularly in the Calvinist community, who hold that God not only predestines individuals to heaven or hell, but he predestines every single thing that happens in world history. Every little motion of every little particle of dust or atom, God predestines that that's going to happen. And so an obvious question is, well, if that's what you believe, how can you prove that? What does the Bible say about that? And so I look at the verses that are most commonly proposed by Calvinists to support this view, and you can listen to the episode to hear what I have to say about them. Also, this coming Monday for episode 13, we're going to look at Jesus's clearing of the temple, because he does that in each of the four gospels, but people have questions about it, like, why did he do it? And there's also a question of, when did he do it? Because Matthew, Mark, and Luke presented at the end of his ministry, but John presents it at the beginning. So we're going to wade into that and answer those questions for you.
All right. Also, you can just search Jimmy Akin Podcast and you will find it. Also available on YouTube. For those of you who, so much stuff going on YouTube these days. It's the meeting place. It's the world's meeting place. I'm looking forward to the answer of this question. I am anxious to know this myself. Logan Elrod 1374 asks this: which, if any, pagan gods are real?
Well, in the Old Testament, the Old Testament perspective on the pagan gods is that they are angelic beings that were put in charge of the nations by God. This is something that is mentioned in Deuteronomy, and so and it says that when God divided up the nations and gave them their heritages, so that's a reference to after the Tower of Babel. He put the so-called sons of God, which are angelic beings, in charge of the different nations. And then some of them went bad and started demanding that the people in their care worship them rather than the true creator. And consequently, the Old Testament refers to them in Hebrew as shadim, or demons. And so the idea in the Old Testament, and this is broadly shared in the New Testament as well, is that the pagan gods are real entities that are former angelic beings, but basically they're fallen angels. And this is something that, for example, St. Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians, where he talks about, if you participate in, talking to the Corinthians, if you participate in the worship of an idol in its temple, you're sacrificing to demons. And so, this seems to be the broadly biblical perspective. It's not that pagan gods don't exist. It's that they are finite entities, which the pagans themselves would agree with. They didn't think their gods were infinite. They're finite entities that are of a fallen nature because they're distracting from the worship of the one true God, the ultimate infinite creator God. So on that view, you could propose, well, they all exist. There is a Zeus, there is a Thor, there is an Apophis, and so forth. But I think there's a little bit of a reason to be cautious in this area. Just because there are demons who are behind the pagan gods in the biblical worldview, that doesn't mean everything that every group of pagans believed about their deities is accurate. So it might not be that there is a specific spirit that is Zeus or a specific spirit that's Thor. It could be something else. So I don't think we want to be overly specific in the way in which pagan claims about their deities correspond to ultimate spiritual realities. I mean, obviously they've got it wrong if they're worshiping them, so that if they can be wrong about that, they could be wrong about other stuff about their deities.
Logan, thanks. Great question. Fascinating question. The next one, it's weird questions for Jimmy Akin this hour, and this one comes from Steve0890. Did Neanderthals, I watch PBS. Did Neanderthals have immortal souls?
Well, according to Aristotle, who didn't know about them, but according to Aristotle and later Christian thinkers like Aquinas, who also didn't know about them, they would definitely have souls because all living creatures have souls. That's what keeps them alive. The question would be, do they have rational, for someone like Aquinas, who held that in order to survive death, you need a rational soul? The question would be, do they have rational souls? And that would get us involved in a discussion of exactly what human rationality is and whether or not Neanderthals had it, because we don't really know a lot about Neanderthal cognition. We can infer some things from the archaeological record. They existed earlier than Homo sapiens, which is our subspecies, and they, had perhaps some characteristics that were less advanced than ours, but that's not really clear because they also did things that provide us evidence that they had, like music and burial of the dead, and even burying the dead perhaps with grave goods like flowers and stuff like that. Also, their brains were actually bigger than ours. So based on their degree of encephalopathy, or that's a pathology, in view of their encephalization quotient, they actually had bigger brains than we do. So they might have been smarter than us. We're not sure. What I would say, though, is I think Aquinas is wrong about you need a soul with human level intellect in order to survive death. I actually did a Mysterious World on that, on animal afterlife. I went through Aquinas's arguments for need, and there's no church teaching on this. This is just Aquinas's theological opinion that you need a rational soul to survive death. So I went through his arguments and I conclude they're not persuasive. And on the other hand, we do have evidence for animals surviving death in the forms of veridical near-death experiences. There's a particular type of near-death experience that's what's known as a peak in Darien experience. Darien is a province in Panama, and it's mountainous, so there are mountain peaks in Darien. And there's an old poem that talks about a group of Spanish explorers climbing up a peak in Darien, and one of them gets to the peak first, and he can look out on the Pacific Ocean. The others can't. So all they see is this guy in front of them responding in awe to what he's seeing now that he can see the Pacific Ocean. Well, in early parapsychology or psychical research, as it was then called, this concept of a peak in Darien became attached to a certain type of deathbed vision, where people will see their loved ones coming to them to welcome them into the afterlife. This is very commonly reported, but sometimes they see someone they're not expecting. Like in one famous incident, this is the one that kind of got the name attached. There was a British woman who was dying, and she had multiple brothers and sisters, as you did back in the day. And she's got some of them gathered around her deathbed, but some of them have already died, and not all of them are there. Like they've got one brother in India. And so as she's seeing her departed loved ones come to welcome her into the afterlife, she sees, oh, here's this one sibling, which everyone knows is dead, and here's this other sibling, which everyone knows is dead, and here's this third sibling that everyone knows is dead. And what is my brother in India doing here? Why is he in the realm of the dead? And this was so shocking because as far as all they knew, their brother in India is alive and well. but she sees him in the realm of the dead. And it's so disturbing that one of her sisters has to run out of the room because she just can't deal with it. Well, okay. And then later they get information indicating, yeah, we regret to inform you, your brother in India has passed on. So it turns out she was right. He had died, and she saw him in the realm of the dead. Okay, so here's the thing. That was a Pekindarian experience where you see someone in the afterlife you're not expecting, and it turns out you're right. It happens with animals. People have had near-death experiences where they go in cardiac arrest, and, oh, here's grandma welcoming me into the afterlife, and she's holding my cat Fluffy, who should be alive and at home.
Oh, weird.
And then they bring him back, and it's like, we're sorry, but yeah, your cat Fluffy just died. And so, but you just saw Fluffy in the afterlife. And it turns out this is not uncommon. As I discussed in the Mysterious World episode, I did a search of a database of thousands of near-death experiences, and animals crop up in something like a quarter of them. So I don't think you need a rash. I think if near-death experiences provide evidence of human survival, they also provide evidence of animal survival. So I think Aquinas' arguments don't work. I think we have evidence for at least some animals having afterlives. And also I have a principle that if you've got the concept of an afterlife, then it's overwhelmingly certain that you have an afterlife. And so the fact that Neanderthals buried the dead, unlike other species, cats don't bury the dead, dogs don't bury the dead, whales don't bury the dead, but humans and Neanderthals do. And they even buried, apparently, this is perhaps debatable, but they apparently buried them with grave goods. The purpose of burying someone with grave goods, like jewelry or, axes or whatever, is so that they can use them in the afterlife, at least spiritually. So if we've got Neanderthals being buried with flowers, it's so they can enjoy the flowers in the afterlife. And that would indicate they had the concept of an afterlife. And if you've got the concept of an afterlife, I think you got one. So I would say Neanderthals do have immortal souls, regardless of their exact degree of rationality.
Steve-O, great question. Thank you. It's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. We'll take a quick break and be right back with more of those after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. We'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and his gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
Turn to Mary, the Mother of God, for help bearing witness to the gift of life with the National Life Rosary. Designed exclusively for EWTN, the unique centerpiece and crucifix represent the reality that all life is sacred and begins at conception. Help build a culture of life with the National Life Rosary, available now at EWTNRC.com. EWTN is the global Catholic network.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and it's an awful good thing because it's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin today. Both hours, Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. And we have virtually an endless supply of weird questions because there is virtually an endless supply of people who have weird questions and send them to us. So if you ever want to do that, you can find Jimmy on the internet. He's got lots of ways to get in contact with him, or just send it to us here at radio@catholic.com, and we'll forward it on to Jimmy. This one comes from Rebecca Lynn, 2046. Why does time seem to go by faster as we get older?
Well, there's been a significant amount of research into this question, and there are a number of factors that contribute. Among those factors are novelty decline, reduced information processing, repetitive routines, and memory quality. So taking those one by one, we have a decline in the amount of novelty. that we encounter. When you're a little kid, everything's new. It's all happening for the first time. And novel experiences, things that have never happened to you before, tend to generate stronger memories. And so you have a lot more novelty in your life when you're a kid, and you form stronger memories about it. And that makes it appear that time is passing faster. Whereas there's nothing new happening here. You don't form strong memories, and you don't have you have a sense of time passing more quickly because there's not a whole bunch of new memories crowding in. So that's one factor. Another is reduced information processing. Our brains do not work as fast when we're old as they do when we're young. And so for that reason also, we're not forming as many new memories. And therefore it seems like time is passing slower because you look at this, let's say the last week, and you don't have as many memories formed of it as you would if you were a kid. Then there is repetitive routines. Adults have routines that are more repetitive than small children. We've got work, and we've got habits, and we've got all kinds of stuff that we just kind of cycle through. And that means we don't need to focus a lot on what's happening to us. We're in an established pattern, and we can just kind of coast with that pattern. We don't need to form new memories about it because it's just the same old, and so you look back on the same stretch as, let's say, last week, and I did the same stuff this week as I did the week before. So you don't have a need to form a bunch of memories about it, like a bunch of different stuff was happening. If you take a vacation to, let's say Jamaica, and given how unsafe Jamaica is, you almost get killed, you're going to form memories about that. And you're going to remember that week, but you're much less likely to remember the weeks before it and after it because it was the same old. And then finally, there's memory quality. People get more forgetful as they get older. And so even if you formed a memory at the time something happened, it may not persist or be retrievable in the same way as other memories, like when you were younger. And so for that reason also, if you look back over a stretch of time, you won't see as many memories in that stretch of time, and therefore it seems like that time went faster.
All very interesting. Rebecca Lynn, thank you very much for the question. Weird questions for Jimmy Akin. Cristobal Gomez Gutierrez, 8546, asked this. How tiny can the Blessed Sacrament be? Many years ago, I once asked a priest to clean the paten better because I noticed some particles of the consecrated bread remained on it. He answered that my problem was that I believe that Jesus is present on each of those tiny crumbs. I was very indignant. I like a verse in a Corpus Christi hymn that mentions that Jesus is really present on each of the small pieces of the consecrated bread broken. Now, recently, I was reflecting on that indignant moment, saying to myself, well, Jesus is present as tiny as a molecule, atoms, fundamental particles, or strings, if they exist, until I said, wait a minute, at some point on those levels, one cannot distinguish bread. There is even a theory that says that all the electrons of the universe are the same thing. So I think the limit is not scientific, but philosophical. Jesus is present up to the point when one can perceive the attributes of the bread. But then, maybe that priest was not that wrong at all. Mr. Akin, is Jesus present in the crumbs? And if so, to which level of smallness?
Well, Jesus is present in fragments of the Eucharist down to the point, you're right, down to the point that that bread is recognizable. This has been the standard opinion throughout Catholic history. If you read Aquinas, for example, he explicitly he articulates this, and he says, so what would happen if in his language, the species, meaning the appearances of bread and wine, become corrupt? Well, he says, for example, if you took a host that was consecrated, God forbid, and crushed it into fine powder, he says that, well, it wouldn't have the real presence anymore, because it's those little particles of fine powder are not recognizable as bread. They may be chemically identical to bread, but you're not looking at them with a microscope. God designed the sacraments to work in terms of a human frame of reference with human senses. And so the standard view is that if the particles of the Eucharist or the drops of the precious blood are so small that they are no longer recognizably bread or wine, then the real presence is no longer there. So the real presence persists as long as the appearances of bread and wine persist. And this is incidentally confirmed in a Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith note that came out around 1970. Where they indicated different procedures are to be used. And they point out, depending on the size of the fragments, if the fragments are large enough, they still have the appearance of bread, then you treat them as if the real presence is here, because it is. But if they're so small that they don't have the appearance of bread, then you don't treat them in that way. You treat them in a reverential way, because you know they came from a consecrated host, but they no longer have the real presence. So you treat them in a different way, and you use the purificator and so forth to deal with them. So those are the basic principles. Now, at this point, a lot of folks are going to wonder, well, so how small is that? And here there's no criterion beyond what I've given you that the church has articulated. It's not like they've said if it's smaller than a millimeter, then it's not going to be the real presence. But the basic criterion is if you held it up, and I think you need to hold it up outside of its context, because if I have, let's take Aquinas' example. If someone has a host and it's consecrated, and then they crush it in my presence, I'm going to know that fine powder came from a host, not because it looks like bread, it doesn't, but because they did it in my presence.
Oh yeah, right.
So I think so it's the context that tells me this used to be bread. So I think the way you have to apply the test is, if you didn't know where this came from, would you perceive it as bread? Would a person of normal sound judgment perceive it as bread? And there are lots of situations. I mean, I saw a video once of someone having a black background, and they were like dropping an unconsecrated host on it and noting how, oh, look at all these particles that fell off the host when we do this. And they were arguing these particles do have the real presence, but they were ignoring standard Catholic teaching on this. And if you'd done the same thing, not in my presence, and presented me with the black background with little specks on it and said, is this bread? I'd say, I have no idea. And so, it certainly doesn't look like bread. So I think that in that case, they were being unnecessarily alarmist and stirring up a bunch of fear in people that they shouldn't have, because if you can't tell by looking at it, apart from knowledge of its context, that it's bread, then it does not retain the real presence.
All right, Cristobal Gomez Gutierrez, 8546. I do hope that was helpful to you. Is it true that I guess at a certain point, molecular, when would you stop seeing, like, just in his thing, he said molecules, atoms, fundamental particles, or strings, if they exist. Mm-hmm. I guess if you saw the atoms, you couldn't tell that they were involved.
Oh, no. This is within the macroscopic world.
Yeah.
Things you don't need a microscope to if you have to use a microscope to look at it, you're already past the real presence.
Right. Yeah.
Because you can see particles that fall off of a host with the naked eye,
but you couldn't,
and they do not reveal the real presence because they're not big enough to see that this used to be bread.
All right, that'll do it for this hour, but we've got another hour coming up of weird questions with Jimmy Akin, and so we'll get more weird music, and we'll bring in lots more weird questions. If you like what you hear from Jimmy Akin, you can always check out Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, one of the most popular documentary podcasts in the world. A new episode each Friday. coming up on 350 episodes available. So if you're just finding out about Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, you got a lot of fun in front of you. Also, check out the Jimmy Akin podcast. Up to now, carry the 12 episodes. And you can find that on YouTube as well, or wherever you get your podcasts. I've looked ahead, so I know there are lots of cool questions coming up. Hang on, and we'll continue with Jimmy Akin's, I almost said Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. No, it's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin this hour, and more of that is coming up right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. So happy to be here on this Friday afternoon with Jimmy Akin. And we're doing weird questions with Jimmy Akin. And I have to tell you, even in just casual conversation with Jimmy at the breaks, I learned new words. I got a brand new word from you, Jimmy. You don't probably even know.
Extraterrestrial?
Oh, yes. You know, I've never heard that word before. And I was like, well, there we go. It's a self-explanatory word, but a really good one. Extraterrestrials.
Refers to creatures from another time.
Yeah. But I had, at least that I can recall, I've never heard that before. Weird questions. We get a lot of them. Jimmy loves the weird questions. You can check out his work at Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, where he applies both faith and reason to all kinds of mysteries. And that's kind of what you do here. Jimmy, I've told you this before, but a lot of times we have other apologists on or guests on the show, and they see a question that they have no idea how to answer. And because it's got some weird aspect to it, and they'll go, that's a Jimmy Akin question. So you actually, these questions are actually called Jimmy Akin questions by lots of people. All right, let's get started again. This one comes from Kevin Kindwright. Mr. Akin, I had my future told to me after I had a staring contest with a guy who had the ability to view my future life like watching a video in fast forward, pausing when he saw things he thought important. This is how he explained it to me. He was able to see all the way to my last day, something he said he hadn't been able to do with others. Not only could he see my life through my eyes, but he could also see what was going on all around me. I met him at work. Mr. Akin, have you ever heard of this type of ability before? Can you help me understand what happened and why, please?
Okay, so first I'll analyze the experience in terms of what was reported to you, and then I'll have a few comments on whether likely anything paranormal was happening here. In terms of the experience itself, so this gentleman said that he was able to see your life through your eyes in chronological order in stages. Now, so this would be a form of extrasensory perception, or ESP, because he's not using his physical senses to get this information. So it would be classified as extrasensory, meaning from outside the physical senses. And so it would be a form of ESP. The effect of seeing the future, now there are three classical manifestations of ESP that are reported. They are clairvoyance, which is the ability to see distant or hidden locations in real time. Precognition, which is the ability to get information about the future, although it also has an opposite known as retrocognition, where you get information about the past. And then telepathy, which is mind-to-mind contact. So basically, in clairvoyance, you get information about another place. In precognition, you get information about another time. And then in telepathy, you get information from another mind. So you can think of them as mind to place, mind to time, and mind to mind. Okay. Well, so this would fundamentally be and then I should also add, in some cases, it's hard to pull apart those three and tell exactly which ability is being used. And so parapsychologists also sometimes refer to just general ESP or GESP. So in this case, he's reporting getting information about your future. So that would be precognition. He also says that he's seeing your life through your eyes. And that, to me at least, sounds like telepathy. So this could be a form of ESP, if it's real, that involves both precognition and telepathy. There's also another unusual feature about this, which is he sees your life progressively in an ordered sequence, one bit after another, going further and further into the future. That sounds like a phenomenon that is sometimes proposed for clairvoyance. Now, there are various people who report having what are called out-of-body experiences, where their perspective seems to shift away from their body, and they can travel to further and further locations. And there is a question in with out-of-body experiences about whether anything actually leaves your body. And out-of-body experiencers are divided about this. Some of them think, yeah, there is something that leaves your body, but others say, no, this is just clairvoyance. And instead of leaping directly to some distant location and getting information about it clairvoyantly, instead you get there in stages. So this is called traveling clairvoyance, because your perspective travels to the distant location. And so if any of this is real, and if travel and clairvoyance is real, then this sounds like a form of travel and precognition, where he sees your near future first, and then he travels into your further future, and then eventually he sees your dying day. So that's the general kind of sketch of how the categories of parapsychology would apply to this. It sounds like travel and precognition coupled with possibly with telepathy. Okay. Now, what would I say about whether this involved anything paranormal? Well, anytime something paranormal happens, you need to make a list of things that could explain it, both natural and paranormal, and then look at the contents of the list and see, do the natural explanations work? If some of the natural explanations work, you don't need to go any further. You've got a natural explanation, and you want to prefer the natural explanations because normal natural phenomena are more common than paranormal phenomena. So two things occur to me about this. Fundamentally, there are natural explanations for this. The guy could just be imagining this. He could be committing fraud. He could be yanking your chain, So I see multiple possible natural explanations. He could be mentally ill. So I would need to see some kind of evidence that would convince me that none of those natural explanations are real. And since this is a precognitive experience, well, okay, has anything he said come true in a way that exceeded random chance? And, the answer might be yes, it might be no. There is evidence that if precognition is real, that we're not sensing necessarily the exact future, but a probable future. And so we can take steps to avoid it. If something undesirable is predicted, like if you see yourself dying in a car crash tomorrow on your way to work, you might take a different route to work so you don't get in the car crash. In fact, there have been studies of like train wrecks where they've noted that on the days where the train wrecks happen, the trains are unusually sparsely filled. It's like the people sensed they were going to be in a train wreck, so they took a different train.
Oh, weird.
But you still need evidence, and so that's called a predestination paradox. But you still need evidence of something beyond random chance. So I would say, did he give you information about your future that has already been fulfilled in a way that exceeds random chance? If he didn't, then I would say I would be disinclined to believe this theory. Another reason I would be disinclined to believe this theory is it's atypical. This is not how precognition normally manifests. Normally, when people report precognitive experiences, it is not in this way. In the first place, 60% of the time that people have precognitive experiences, it tends to occur in the form of a realistic dream. But he was not dreaming. On the other hand, there's still 40% of the time when it doesn't happen in a realistic dream. And so maybe his ability is part of that 40%, but it's still something I've never heard of it happening like this. Normally, even in that 40%, if people, they may have a symbolic dream, or they may just have a flash of something, this is going to happen in the future. but they don't have this travel in clairvoyance. Travel in precognition when they're looking at someone. That's, to my knowledge, that hadn't been reported in the literature. It may have been, and I just haven't seen it, but as of right now, it sounds like this is an atypical experience, and generally when people report atypical experiences, it has a natural explanation. This is also a rule that's applied in ghost investigations and things like that. If you get a client and the client reports something that sounds like it's out of a horror movie rather than what really gets reported normally in ghostly encounters, which is not horror movie like, you're immediately suspicious. This person may be committing fraud because they want attention or book deal or movie deal. If it deviates too substantially from what other people have reported, that's reason to be suspicious, and this seems to deviate substantially from what other people who have precognitive experiences report.
Well, thank you very much for the question, Kevin. That was a great one to get us started. It's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin, and we'll continue with it right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Stay with us for more Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at magnificat.com.
The most original Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
What have you always wanted to know about the Vatican? Well, I'm your Vatican insider, and I answer that question when I bring you the news about the Pope, Vatican City, and I share insights and stories from a broad spectrum of church ministries.
Vatican Insider with Joan Lewis, Saturday night, 9 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. Thanks for being here with us. Lots of weird questions lined up, and this one comes from Bethany 45101. What if the priest doing Mass is really old and suddenly dies during the service? How is that handled?
Well, there's a document called De Defectibus, which is Latin for on defects, meaning on defects occurring in the celebration of Mass, that was part of the 1962 Missal that actually goes into this very subject, among other defects that can happen. But having the priest drop dead during Mass is definitely a defect in the Mass. And the basic distinction is between whether he dies before or after the consecration has happened or in the middle of the consecration. If he dies before the consecration has happened, then you can basically discontinue the Mass. It doesn't have to be completed. And so, whoever's in charge can say, I'm sorry, but we'll celebrate Mass at a later time, because Father so-and-so has just passed on. If he dies after both consecrations have happened, then you could have other people, like extraordinary ministers, complete the distribution of communion. They couldn't say the prayers the priest is assigned, but they could at least distribute communion to those who were there. The most significant case is, what if he dies after the consecration of the bread, but before the consecration of the wine? In this case, you've got one element consecrated and the other not. And canon law provides that the two elements are never to be consecrated independently, and it uses the strongest possible language in Latin, nephos. That means never, ever, 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 under any circumstances, do this. So if the bread has been consecrated and the wine has, and then the priest dies before the consecration of the wine, then you have to suspend the Mass until you can bring in another priest to complete the consecration of the wine and finish the Mass. People may need to be left there to guard the consecrated hosts. to protect them from profanation and so forth until a new priest can be brought in. But you got to get a new priest to come in and finish the liturgy. So that's a basic sketch of how it can be handled. If you want more of the details, I would suggest checking out a copy of De Defectibus. There are English translations of it online.
Bethany, thank you for that question. Bet you didn't know there was quite so precise an answer, did you, Bethany? This one comes from Dennis G, 33. Which church sui juris would extraterrestrials join if they accepted the faith?
Anyone they want. You can join any. So a church sui juris is Latin for with its own law. And frequently in English, these churches are referred to, many of them are referred to as Eastern rites. That's not really the correct term for them. But the Latin rite and all of the Eastern rites are churches with their own laws. So they're all church sui jurises, to use a really weird anglicization of the plural of a Latin phrase. But you can join, if you're not a baptized Catholic, you can join any church sui juris you want. And so if aliens came down and wanted to join one, they could join the Latin rite, they could join the Maronite rite, they could join the Chaldean rite, they could join any church sui juris that they chose to.
All right. I hope that was helpful to you. Dennis G, 33. Let's go to J.P. Morgan's 1095. Has Protestant exorcism ever been validated? Is Protestant exorcism only the goofy stuff like Bob Larson and Benny Hinn yelling and throwing invisible spiritual inner chi fireballs at their subjects? Or does it have any credulity, like the most severe case I've seen with the Warren family helping Maurice Frenchy Terrell on camera footage?
Okay, so there are cluster questions here. If by the Warren family, I'm not familiar with the Frenchy Terrell case, but if by the Warren family you mean Ed and Lorraine Warren, they were Catholic. They were Catholic lay people, so they weren't authorized to perform exorcisms. They could perform deliverance prayers, though. But in terms of Protestant exorcism, has it been validated? Well, if you mean has there been a study performed, looking at the effectiveness of Protestant exorcisms, I'm not aware of any study that's been done scientifically, but I see no reason not to accept it as a valid concept. Whether it's as effective or not, will vary. It's going to depend on what they do, because not all Protestant exorcists have the same practices. But in the New Testament, there were you didn't even have to be a Christian to do exorcisms. Evil spirits exist all over the world. They affect people in all different kinds of cultures, and all different kinds of cultures have rites of exorcism to deal with them. In the New Testament, we have Jewish exorcists. They're also mentioned in other Second Temple Jewish literature, like the Jewish historian Josephus. But Jesus talks about Jewish exorcists, and they meet Jewish exorcists in Acts, and Jesus does not challenge that they are doing exorcism. In fact, when he gets accused of using demonic power to do his exorcisms, he says, "Well, then who are your sons driving out demons by?" In other words, I'm using the same power they are. And so he acknowledges that Jewish exorcists are driving out demons, and they're not even Christians. Well, if you don't even have to be a Christian to do an exorcism, then there's no reason Protestants can't do them. In terms of, is it all the way Bob Larson or Benny Hinn does it? No. There are much more formal exorcisms in other branches of Protestantism. For example, I'm plugged into the exorcist community, and I have talked with both Eastern Orthodox exorcists, and I've talked with Anglican exorcists, and they use a more formal ritual procedure just like Catholics do. So it's not all Wild West freewheeling, throwing chi fireballs at people and yelling at them. Although I should note, Catholic exorcists also can yell. But you you do have exorcism, in Protestantism. It is not as common, especially outside of the Pentecostal charismatic movement, as it is in, say, Catholicism or Orthodoxy, but it is real and it can be effective.
All right. Thank you very much. I got time for another one before we have to go. Thank you to JP Morgains, and I hope that that's working out for you in whatever market you're in. Rattlehead GY9CT asks this. Could aliens exist on another world, provided that the interpretation of Genesis be that God filled the entire universe with life, as opposed to just Earth?
Well, I don't. So aliens could exist on another world, but that wouldn't necessitate changing the interpretation of Genesis, because all Genesis tells us in the creation narratives is God created life here on the earth. It doesn't mention other planets. And so if God created other children of his on other planets, he just didn't tell us about it in Genesis. So you can still read Genesis as talking about the creation of life on earth, which is all it addresses. So those would be the 2 points I'd make. If God chose to create aliens elsewhere, he could do that, but it wouldn't necessitate any change in the interpretation of Genesis.
All right. Thank you very much for that question. On we go. Well, I should say Rattlehead GY9CT again. I don't want to miss getting to say that twice. Mario Master 97 wants to know this. Did Jesus have a body before he was born as a man?
Well, not unless there's something that hadn't been revealed to us. Now, we know Jesus acquired a human body when he became incarnate and was born as a man. It's conceivable that we also know his divine nature does not natively have a body, because divinity is a spirit, and spirits do not have bodies. So he didn't have a body because of his divine nature. Therefore, any body he acquired had to be an acquired body. Could be either acquired temporarily, or it could be acquired in a permanent way through incarnation. In terms of could there have been a temporary body, well, there are occasions in the Old Testament where the angel of the Lord shows up, apparently in physical form. Also in Joshua, the commander of the Lord's army shows up, also apparently in physical form. And so some have interpreted the angel of the Lord or the commander of the Lord's army as being the pre-incarnate Jesus. And if he showed up in physical form, well, presumably that would have been a temporary body, just like the temporary bodies that angels can assume when they take physical form. But the only one we know of that he had on a permanent basis was when he became incarnate as a man. Hypothetically, could there be other ones? Well, yeah, there actually could, because God is omnipotent, and if he can take a body once, he can become incarnate once. He can become incarnate multiple times. This is something that Aquinas talks about. And so hypothetically, Jesus could, and it doesn't even have to have a rational nature. He could take other bodies, although Aquinas doesn't think it would be fitting for him to do that, but it's possible. So yeah, if he also incarnated elsewhere in the world before he became incarnate as Jesus of Nazareth, then he would have an additional body or additional bodies that we're simply not told about. However, because we're not told about them, we have no reason to believe in them. You know, just because it's a hypothetical possibility doesn't mean we've got any evidence for it. And in fact, I would say we don't have evidence for it. So I wouldn't encourage people to believe any of this stuff. But out of a recognition of God's power, I would encourage them to recognize that it is possible that he could have done this. We just have no evidence that he did do this.
All right. This next question I've been wanting to get to, frankly. And Jimmy will take your questions. He takes them all seriously. S. Burton, 1971, asks this. How does Odo not turn into a pile of goo when he uses a transporter?
So this is a question referring to the show Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which has a shapeshifter named Odo, whose native form is a bunch of goo. But he can mold that goo into other shapes and appear, for example, as if he's a humanoid. Well, a transporter takes you apart on the molecular level and does so really fast, but I don't see any reason why it would affect Odo, because he obviously has some way of holding his molecules in place to impersonate a human. Maybe it's a telekinetic or psychokinetic ability, maybe it's some chemical ability, but he's got a way to freeze his molecules into a stable form. And while they're in that stable form, a transporter could disassemble them and reassemble them. So I don't see any reason why he would have to convert into goo any more than we humans convert into goo when we get taken apart by a transporter in the Star Trek universe.
Thanks, S. Burton. Excellent question. Lots more questions to come. Weird ones for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live. Many people have forgotten just how revolutionary the Bible creation stories are. But the first 3 chapters of Genesis are a powerful challenge to anyone in any generation who would undervalue human lives. In the Beginning, the new book by Monica Migliorino Miller, will take you on a fantastic journey through the first chapters of Genesis, unfolding the richness of life as God sees it. Get In the Beginning today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore.
When it comes to Catholic teachings about Mary, there's one question we hear more than any other. Where is that in the Bible? The answer? Everywhere. In Bible Mary, the Mother of Jesus and the Word of God, Father John Weiss opens Scripture to reveal a Mary who has been hiding in plain sight. Order your copy of Bible Mary today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
What was the church like in its infancy? In a word, Catholic. And Joe Heschmeyer has the receipts. In his best-selling book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, he gives you the details from the historical records of the first 2 centuries of Christianity. Right now, get a copy for just $10, plus free shipping if you live in the continental United States. Get more information and order The Early Church Was the Catholic Church at theearlychurchwascatholic.com.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Yes, that's different music. It's because that's the weird, well, it's not weird music, but that's the music for Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. And we've got a lot of them, loads and loads of weird questions come to us for Jimmy. Where else on Catholic radio are you getting questions about Odo in a transporter? In any media. I just don't know where you're going to get that quality of questions. So here's another one. This person's name, internet name is Ultimate Original God. If I want my child to have all sacraments of initiation at once, like in the East and the former Roman practice, how can I do that? I want to have my future children sacramentalized as soon as possible.
Well, so if you want now the time so obviously baptism, that's given to all children, regardless of which Catholic Church sui juris you're in. In the Latin rite, the age of confirmation varies. And so you could, for example, go down to Mexico and have your child confirmed before the age that is customary here in the United States, where it varies but tends to be older. But that wouldn't get your child Holy Communion. So what you would need to do in this circumstance, if you want to do this, is you would need to go to an Eastern Rite church where all 3 sacraments are given to infants, And you need to go there long enough that you don't become a member of that rite unless you want to, but you go there long enough that you can be considered a subject of the pastor of that parish. This is a difference in canon law between Eastern and Western Catholics. Here in the West, jurisdiction tends to be territorial. So you're subject to the pastor of whatever parish you live in, whether you go there or not. And that can become relevant, for example, when you're getting married. If you've been going to another parish forever, you still got to go to your territorial pastor in order to get permission for whoever you want to do the ceremony. On the other hand, in Eastern canon law, jurisdiction tends to be more subject-based than territory-based. So if you go to an Eastern Orthodox church long enough to become a subject of the pastor of that parish, then he can perform all three of the sacraments for your children. And you need to talk to him about, make sure he's willing to do that, find out how long you need to attend there and stuff like that. But that would be the way to do it. Could you then bring your child for communion below the regular age of communion to a Latin parish? Yes, you could, because once you're initiated to communion, you have a right to communion, even if you aren't of the age that is customary in the church sui juris that you're attending. So if you have an Eastern Rite baby that has been initiated into the sacrament of the Holy Eucharist, and that baby is brought to a Latin Rite church, they're supposed to give that baby communion. Now, Eastern Rite parents who want that to happen may need to talk to the authorities at the Latin parish to make sure they understand the situation. But in principle, that baby has a right to the Eucharist once he's been admitted to it. And the same thing would be true of any child that you had admitted to the Eucharist in this way. They should give it to the child, but, convincing them of that may involve some work. And, people can be stubborn mules at times, so you might encounter some difficulties, but that's what the law would indicate.
Ultimate. Thank you very much for the question. This one comes from Jason. Jason Pohlmeyer. Most people get half their DNA from their mother and half from their father. I assume Jesus got at least half of his DNA from Mary, but what about the other half? Was he 100% Mary? Did God just invent 50%? Do you think God made him resemble St. Joseph?
Okay, so this question comes up periodically, and he was not 100% Mary. That we can say for certain because Jesus is a man. And that means he had not just an X chromosome that he would have inherited from Mary, he also had a Y chromosome. And so even if God took a couple of ova from Mary and fused them into one so that you had a conception, or took a set of genetic material from one ova and then copy and pasted it, that would produce a female birth that would have a double X pattern. And so the absolute minimum is God would have had to come up with a Y chromosome in addition to any DNA that came from Mary. I think it's more likely that he came up with half of the DNA and that only half came from Mary and half came from God, including the Y chromosome. Do I think that God made him resemble St. Joseph? Well, this is all speculation. We don't know what St. Joseph looked like. So I have no way of assessing this, but I can tell you, if I were God, I would not do that, because the whole point of the virgin birth is to make the point, this is God's son. There was no human father. And so it would obscure that truth, which is what the virgin birth is designed to communicate, if God made him look like his foster father Joseph. because if he made him look like his foster father Joseph, that would just lead people to say, they just got together before they were married, and he's not really virgin born at all. So if I were God, I would not make him look like St. Joseph.
All right. Let's see. That was Jason. Thank you, Jason. Thank you very much for that question. Emerson Green asks this question: could someone be a Catholic atheist?
Well, it depends on the senses in which you use the terms. I know of instances where the phrase Catholic atheist does get used. I was talking to a friend of mine once from Northern Ireland, and he talked about, how the culture over there is heavily dependent on are you a Protestant or are you a Catholic? And so he recounted that there are occasions where, someone will get asked, are you a Protestant or a Catholic? And the person will say, I'm an atheist. To which the person asking the question will roll their eyes and say, yes, but are you a Protestant atheist or a Catholic atheist? Because being Protestant or Catholic is not simply a matter of religious belief. It's a matter of culture and which culture you affiliate with. In the same way, you can have Jewish atheists. They're part of Jewish culture. They may not personally believe in God, but they identify with Jewish culture. And so you can have Jewish atheists. Now, in another sense, if you have someone who is an atheist, it's very hard to see how that person would not commit apostasy. Apostasy is the total repudiation of the Christian faith. And even though you might believe some things about Jesus, if you reject the existence of God fundamentally and say, I'm an atheist, well, you might be culturally a Catholic, but you're not theologically a Catholic. And in fact, if you have essentially abandoned the theology of Christianity, that's very plausibly read as an act of apostasy, in which case you would just be a non-Christian at that point. Even though you may be culturally Catholic and maybe even have a few Catholic beliefs, but I don't think one could be a Catholic atheist in the theological sense, but it certainly happens in the cultural sense.
Emerson, thanks. That'll bring us right to the break. Weird questions for Jimmy Akin this hour, and there's lots more to come right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
You're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
This is Father Ramil Fajardo. Dear friends, if we understand the power of radio, then we can understand that the gospel can be made very real, very convincing, powerful enough to send shockwaves throughout the whole country and indeed the whole world. Catholic radio is necessary in order that the gospel be sent throughout all the world, and most importantly, a convincing witness of Christ's presence here on earth.
The world needs EWTN Catholic Radio, now more than ever.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul? And that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Weird. We got lots of weird questions. Gathered them up for Jimmy Akin. Weird questions for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers
Jimmy
Live.
Akin gathered them up for Jimmy Akin.
Yeah, you're part of we. I just included you under the we in that one. Well, now I forgot where I am.
Question 19.
Question 19. All right. Trent R8906 asked this essential question. Really, this is essential to any apologetics discourse. If we discovered the creature from the Black Lagoon, would it be permissible to eat it in Lent?
Yeah, specifically Fridays during Lent or Ash Wednesday, which are the days that abstinence from meat is required, meaning meat of land-dwelling birds and fowls. Okay, so if we discovered the creature from the Black Lagoon, could we eat it? Well, the creature from the Black Lagoon, despite its humanoid body form, is presented in the 3 movies that have been made about it as a fish-like creature. You know, it's not a mammal. And I saw you had a reaction to my mention of 3 movies.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, the first one is The Creature from the Black Lagoon. The second is Revenge of the Creature, and the third is The Creature Walks Among Us. So it's either a fish or a reptile or something like that, and therefore, it's a water dweller. It's not a mammal, and so your bird, and so you could eat it, without violating the restriction of needing to avoid flesh meat on those days. A related question is, would it be moral to eat it as opposed to canonically permitted to eat it? And there we get into the question of its intelligence, because I don't think it's moral to eat creatures unnecessarily. I'm not talking about, when your plane crashes in the Andes and you're all starving. But under ordinary circumstances, I don't think it's moral to eat creatures above a certain intelligence level if you have no necessity to. So, like, I don't think you could hunt and kill a human and eat them just because you want to, the way you could hunt and kill and eat a deer, which is perfectly fine morally. So what level of intelligence does the creature from the Black Lagoon have? Well, it's been a while since I've seen the movies, but I know that in the 3rd movie, The Creature Walks Among Us, the creature is starting to mutate a little bit. He's losing some of his appurtenances, like his gills and stuff. And and his skin becomes more mammalian, and so they actually dress him in human clothes. But that's why it's Walks Among Us, because he's like blending into society now. He still doesn't have human intelligence, but it's clear he's got enough intelligence that he can tell when he's being framed for a murder and when he's being framed for a crime. And that suggests, now, if you framed a dog for a crime, the dog is not going to have any idea what you're doing. If you framed a cat for a crime, the cat is not going to have any idea what you're doing. If you frame a cow or a pig for a crime, they are not going to understand what you're doing. So the creature has a significant level of non-human intelligence to be able to understand this concept. You can tell by its actions that it understands what's going on.
Right.
So I would say the creature is above the threshold that I would personally consider it moral to eat. To give a point of comparison, I used to eat, going out for sushi, I used to eat taco, which is not what you'd think because it's not Mexican, it's Japanese, it's octopus. And I would eat Ica, which is squid. And I liked taco and I liked Ica, but I don't eat them anymore because I've done research, and octopi or octopuses, to use the surprisingly accurate plural in English, octopus and squid are freaky smart. They're not human smart, but they are freaky smart. And they're smart enough that I just find it distasteful,
to eat them,
metaphorically speaking, to taste them literally. So the creature is even smarter than they are in terms of its understanding of human relationships. So I would not want to eat the creature. Then there's the fact that it's one of a kind as far as we know, and you don't want to be causing one of a kind creatures to go extinct. So I also wouldn't eat it for that reason.
Trent, thank you for the question. So what I'm taking from that, though, Jimmy, is if you're flying over the Andes with the creature from the Black Lagoon, you get in a plane crash.
All bets are off.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. That part I just wanted to clarify before we moved on. This one comes from Aldegundis. If a ship of volunteers is collected to go to Mars, should the church insist on sending a bishop?
Well, Cy Kellett, maybe I should throw this question over to you. What do you say?
Well, I wrote a little novella about this, about a bishop from Mars called Ad Limina. So thank you for asking me. And I don't think the church would be in any position to insist, but why not send a bishop to Mars if you can?
Okay. So that's your answer.
Yeah.
I'll provide mine. It's going to depend on how many Catholics are going to be on Mars, and it's going to depend on how difficult the trip is, how long it takes to get to Mars. If this were a once in a generation trip, if it took, 20 years to get to Mars or something, or 40 years to get to Mars, then that would, if you have Catholics who are going and they're going to need pastoral care, you need a bishop on site to do further ordinations. And if you got a really long time before another ship is going to come, then it would increase the need to have a bishop on that first colony ship. On the other hand, that's not what we're talking about. They're looking at getting people to Mars in like 2 years or something. And so you could have a bishop either visit to do ordinations of new priests, or you could have the new priests ordained here and shipped over there. And then you could assign them to the diocese of some particular earthbound bishop, like let's say the Diocese of Orlando, Florida or something. Okay, so I don't think that it would be necessary given current travel conditions. I also would look at the history of what happened the last time we discovered and colonized a new world, because this has happened before. I mean, you and I, Cy, are living in the new world.
Yeah.
North America is in terms of the Middle Ages, we are on Mars.
Right.
And so that's why they called the old world, and the new world, the new world, because it was a whole new world they had found. Okay, and they colonized it. And the way they did that was the initial ships they sent over, I don't know that they had priests. They may have, but it wasn't necessary. Once there was a stable Catholic population, and even before there was a stable Catholic population in the New World, they started sending over missionaries, and they also started sending over priests. And eventually, given the travel difficulties between the Old World and the New World, once the Catholic population of the New World started to get to a certain level, it made sense to start appointing bishops, who were initially imports from Europe. And then later, as the situation matured in the New World, they began to appoint native bishops, people who had been born in the New World. So I would say that we're likely to see a similar pattern unfold with respect to Mars. So I don't think the church should insist on sending a bishop initially. If the ship is, a given colony ship is full of Catholics, I would say, well, they should insist on sending a priest to care for their spiritual needs. But as long as travel conditions allow people to get to and from Mars relatively quickly, I don't think they need to send a bishop until such time as the population, the Catholic population of Mars increases to the point that it becomes more practical to have local bishops.
All day. I hope that was helpful to you. I don't know where they're going to get the wine and for the mass on Mars, but that's another problem for another day.
They'll have to grow grapes or import it.
Martian wine, notoriously bad. But again, for another day. Bethany Rose, 2023.
Actually, I've thought about writing a science fiction story that involves wine from Mars.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it would be about a Martian family that is rich, that has this big multi-generational kind of dynasty, But in the end, the family loses its money and fails, and the final scene is of two characters drinking the last bottle of wine from the House of Mars.
Oh, well, we're going to need some soil up there first.
They've got soil on Mars. It's pretty red.
Well, yeah. All right, here's Bethany Rose's question. I work with a non-Christian lady who used to be a Hindu and claims to believe in the Christian God. She was not a very nice person from what I saw, how she treated other people. One day she told me a story that when she went to a church to pray, because she was having a problem at that time, she saw blood on her palm. The light in the Catholic Church was dim, so she looked at the palm intensely and didn't know what it was. After a few seconds, the blood disappeared. She got spooked and thought that was a spooky church, so she went to the Anglican church nearby. Before she told me the story, I was listening to the life of St. Padre Pio, who had stigmata. My question is, does stigmata happen to anybody?
Well, it's certainly reported. There are various reports of stigmatists down through church history and even today. The question is, what evidence do we have in particular cases that this is the result of a paranormal phenomenon? Because there are other explanations for it that can apply in individual cases. There have been, for example, cases of imagination, where people imagine having stigmata. And this is particularly possible in cases of invisible stigmata. So there are some stigmatists who really do manifest blood that can be seen by the senses. There are, St. Francis was one of those, St. Padre Pio was one of those, but a lot of stigmatists will say they can perceive their stigmata, but other people can't. So this is like a mental phenomenon rather than a physical one. And I don't rule out the possibility of God doing that. He can give people visions of other things. He can give them visions of stigmata. So I don't rule that out in principle as a paranormal phenomenon, but it also is open to the possibility of mental illness or imagination or fraud. Even with physical stigmata, there have been cases of fraud. I am aware of a case involving some nuns a few centuries ago, where one of the nuns was a stigmatist, and it was physical. She could show you her hands, and she was even examined. And the examiners said, yeah, it looks like she's really got stigmata. But then some other examiners came in and they scrubbed harder, and they found that her stigmata were painted on. So it was a fraud. But there are cases where this is reported. Sometimes it has a natural explanation, but in other cases, it genuinely seems to have a paranormal explanation. There also may be cases where the power of self-suggestion causes skin to burst in a way that even though there's no obvious cause, it's still a psychological cause, but it happens to someone, that their skin bursts in a way that the stigmata appear on them. So it does happen. In terms of the Hindu lady that you mentioned, I'm glad that she says she believes in the Christian God. Actually, people don't realize this, but about 90% of Hindus are monotheists. They may talk about multiple gods, but most of them on surveys either say there is really only one God, or there may be multiple manifestations of the one God, but they're monotheists. And they would, many of them include, so the Christian God is God. He's the true one God. So I'm glad that she's open to that. In terms of her experience, I couldn't say what caused it, whether it was psychological or paranormal, but I can't rule it out that something paranormal happened in this situation. So I would be open-minded, but not convinced either. It's an interesting experience, and with no ability to investigate it, I would say that's very interesting. And I don't know whether it's genuinely paranormal or not. It could go either way.
Bethany Rose, thank you so much. Thanks to everybody who got their weird questions to us. We'll do it again, I'm sure, before too long, because it's fun to do. and it comes with this really awesome music. Jimmy Akin, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Check out Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World at mysterious.fm or wherever you get your podcasts, or on YouTube. And check out the new podcast, the Jimmy Akin podcast, available, again, wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. That'll do it for us. I'm Cy Kellett. We'll see you next time, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.